Dear colleagues, dear friends, good afternoon. I'm really glad to welcome you at our session of Gaidar Forum related to the issues of taxation policy. We've just finished this session related to customs, and less people were there, and so I was right when I compared payments, and so taxes are still of greater concern than customs. And so let me introduce to you the distinguished participants of our panel. So I think, although I think you all know them very well, these are very well-known people. My name is Sergei Sinelnikov, Rector of Russian Foreign Trade Academy. The keynote reporter today is Sergei Dorobyshevsky, Scientific Director, Gaidar Institute for Economic Policy. We have participants, Mr. Turunin, Deputy Minister of Finance of the Russian Federation, Dmitry Satin, Deputy Head of the Federal Tax Service, Alexander Shokin, President of the Russian Union of Industrial Entrepreneurs, Sergei Shatalov, Advisor to the Director, Financial Research Institute of the Ministry of Finance, and we should not introduce Mr. Shatalov, you all know, and Mr. Boris Titov, Presidential Commissioner for Entrepreneurs' Rights. Let me start our session with a small introduction, and then we are going to have the keynote speech, and then we're going to discuss it. When we were preparing the forum we started this process last spring, we decided to include and to build up the report, the keynote speech in the following matter. We should put the question, which taxation system would be perfect for Russia? It should correspond to certain theoretical criteria, what we call an optimum taxation system, plus taking into account our social, regional, economic context, our institutes, and get something which would be described by basic rates and the amount of taxes on one hand. On the other hand, we analyzed proposals how to reform taxation system, and we understood that there is a number of myths about our taxation system which move different proposals which form it in the common agenda, and now they are not peddled quite strongly. If VAT is not collected, let's replace it for sales tax. And then from this message that VAT is being collected poorly, there are proposals how to improve the system. Or other thing, our taxation system suppresses investments. We discuss whether it's correct or not. People start to give proposal. Let's exempt someone from this one and load it to a different entity. So our report, you can download it from the website or you can take it on paper. It is built up in the spirit of the analysis of such myths, either the arguments for or against, and the conclusions. My proposal is to give the floor to Sergei Dorobyshevsky, who will stop only on several myths, not all of them due to a lack of time. And then we are going to have a discussion about this statements and others. Thank you for your presentation, which is brought up to the screen. I do not pretend to be, in my presentation, that I'm going to retell and mention absolutely all myths. I'd like to highlight the most critical or disputable issues which need to be discussed to demonstrate our position, and then later on to have a discussion on the grounds of our forum. I would start with a short characteristic. Clicker doesn't work. No. So, short summary of our taxation system, which I believe is very significant to be able to understand the proposals which we finally make and formulate related to the ways of reforming and very useful to understand why we selected myths and tried to react on them. We must say that our taxation system is basically quite stable, and in the way it exists now, it was built in the very beginning of 90s, before the economics of Russia suffered both positive and negative shocks related to the booming growth of noughties and go further later crisis. As the practice show, our economics could withstand and could fulfill all the tasks. The basics which were embedded in the founders of the system at that time were related with the principles that, according to the existing theoretical understandings, how should the optimum system look like, and our practice, and also taking into account the peculiarities of Russian economic structure. The main part of taxation, tax incomes of Russian budget should be not taxes, but royalties, which are collected through MET tax and export duties. There's a low share of fiscal taxes in terms of federal budget. These are indirect budgets, indirect taxes. And in the noughties, we had a very brave and bold experiments, a very successful one, implementation of the flat income tax. And Russia was one of the pioneers in this area, and it played a model for many other countries. At the same time, this taxation system, counting for the whole period, despite different positive or negative shocks, the taxation system provided adequate income level for the budget of the government, on average 35%, according to our calculations, although there were periods of higher oil prices when the liabilities of the budget were higher and royalties are allowed to get more funds and less funds were taken due to changes of the market situation. But nevertheless, we see even the conditions of crisis shocks, the reduction of incomes was in the range of 4 percentage points of GDP. So if we take a normal average situations when costs should cover completely the incomes, we see that even amid very strong shocks, the deficit of the budget is not going beyond 3 to 4 percentage point of GDP if we model it given the existing taxation system, which is a very good indicator for us of its adequacy and stability. Of course, we should mention that for the years of the system existence and its improvement in terms of its administration, and here we have a very big merit of Federal Taxation Service. Russia made a very big leap in terms of doing business rating for 100 places, and this is one of the best indicators for Russia in different positions, in various positions of this indicator. In terms of automations and digitalization of processes, and with the introduction of such systems as tax-free, VAT-free, KKT, personal account of taxpayers, Federal Taxation Service, Russia takes one of the leading places in terms of coming closer to the digital economy, which was already discussed also on this platform, on the platform of our forum. All these years, already 15 years of existence, even more years of existence, there were practically the same myths circulating about the build-up of the system and the ways of improvement of the taxation system, which was already mentioned by Sergei Germanovich. Maybe the first question I wanted to start with, if we speak specifically about some specific issues, is the question to what extent the taxation system impacts the business activity, investment activity. And maybe simply speaking, to put it simple, about the taxation load itself. Practically every year, also during discussions of the draft laws on federal budget and during discussions of the main areas of taxation policy, there is a question about the magnitude of the load on the economics, on business, and the indicator which is normally being operated and was mentioned by the Ministry of Finance is the amount of tax deductions for GDP. It reflects to some extent the general burden for the whole economy, but from the point of view of the impact to the investment decisions, it is less informative for companies and also for the doing business evaluations. So on the other hand, such position is understandable because the adequate calculation of tax burden and understanding how different taxes impact realization and implementation of different projects is a difficult question from the theoretical and practical point of view, because here we need to proceed not only from the rates of nominal taxes and how to understand and determine the tax base and what taxes exist, direct, indirect, but also one of the key moments is still the market, the producer or the company acting on. What is the demand elasticity in terms of price, because it would then determine who takes the burden of different taxes. And even if we take a look at the global practice, international practice, there are only few methodologies of comparison and benchmarking in this regard. One of the methodologies is the methodology of Oxford University, and it is related to the limited efficient or average efficient tax rates, which on one hand suffers from a number of disadvantages, because it implies that the key tax impacting the investment decision making is the income tax, the profit tax, and the basis to calculate it imply that other taxes are impacting not only the comparison of pre or post-tax profitability, the cost of resources, cost of labor, capital, for instance, and so at the same time, if we take intra-industrial or intra-country comparisons, we should do the same assumption that distribution of tax burden between producer and consumer is equal in all situations. Otherwise, we won't be able to operate with more precise data. And so, if we take Russia, in our report, we cited not so we included not our calculations, but received from calculations from the Oxford University, and we do understand that the above-mentioned limitations are really applicable here. Of course, there are shortcomings from this methodology, but nevertheless, we can see that from the point of view of calculation of threshold taxation rates during realization of the unified business project, and from the point of view of the tax level, Russia, as you can see, is located in the part of the economics where they can enjoy quite beneficial tax rates. And it relates first and foremost to the project of non-oil and gas area, because for oil and gas industry we should take into account much more taxes, and we should take into account also different rules of taxation. Next issue, which we consider as important, and although in our paper we designated it as a myth, and our export duties should provide low prices for energy resources in the domestic market, which should be one of the tasks of a new system. Nevertheless, we understand that at the same time our position has always been that export duties result in distortion in the domestic market, because our oil refinery, starting from the Soviet time, and the situation is still there, they produce negative value added, and the export duty can have a negative impact first and foremost to the industry itself, but from the point of view of the general efficiency of the economy and removal of unequally distributed subsidies, it would have a generally positive effect for the economy. In August last year, as you all know, finally the reform for taxation industry for the oil and gas industry taxation was accepted, including the reduction of export oil duties to zero with compensation measurements. And greeting this positive and good step, we believe that indeed there could have been more radical measures taken. First of all, in terms of reform as is, proceeding from the increase of MET after export duties abolition, this reform couldn't be absolutely neutral for the budget. Part of the funds is still left with the company. So from our point of view, especially in the conditions where oil prices are not very low, but still lower versus levels we saw just recently, the painfulness of abolition of the export duty is less for the total economy. And in this case, taking into account compensation measurements, on our opinion, this maneuver could be done not for 5, but 1.52 years. As a shortcoming of the decision, we consider the fact that the law does not imply any fixed times of abolition, of removal of the excise, and the time during which the industry would receive state support. And taking into account the current geopolitical situation, I believe different criteria should be used to the selection, not only take into account modernization and upgrading of refineries, but also taking into account criteria which companies should receive which subsidies. And from the point of view of freezing prices for oil products, the most efficient step would be just reduction of excise for some products, and other than the direct administrative price regulation. Also, to the question of tax burden, very closely related is the issue of VAT, whether it's a tax which suppresses high-tech industries and the value-added industries, or is it quite neutral from the theoretical point of view? In our paper, we provide specific justification and conclusions, taking into account the distribution of the load. VAT depends on the elasticity of the demand, and here producers of unique goods, which are harder to find substitutes, have more opportunities to relocate this VAT to consumers and not bear this burden as producers. And so the distribution and the extent of the load on companies depend on the structure of the value added, the added value of the company, and what the element of the royalty look like. Because in the practical activity, it's not possible to segregate during the taxation accounting. And from our point of view, if we don't speak about service companies and only production companies of the real sector of the economy, it's rather companies which work with obsolete technologies, they bear higher burden of VAT versus high-tech and upgraded companies.
Yes, we'll discuss this issue a bit later. Yes, another issue which has been discussed very actively, it's an issue of whether the taxation system, whether the tax rates should be more progressive or not. On one hand, we acknowledge that, yes, economic theory is saying that the progressive income tax is more efficient and it enables us to solve or take out many disproportions in economics and the social area. But speaking about Russia, and given our experience, still I think the distribution of population by their income level, what level of income accounts for a certain level of salaries which are subject to taxation, and given the opportunities which exist in Russia based on taxation of other types of and grades of salaries, all the tax benefits, and we believe that in the current stage of development, although there could be political benefits, but economically thinking the progressive taxation scale may have a negative consequences. Another question which has been mentioned very, very often. On one hand, in Russia, Russia is the federative states. On the other hand, the system works in a way that over 50% of the revenue go to the federal budget, and the vertical budgets are usually non-balanced. And the proposal is that we have to change the taxation system so that we could return it to a balance. We believe that since the structure and the geographical spread or distribution of economic activities in Russia, we have to propose a certain change into taxation rates or a system, or to identify certain taxes to make it more balanced. To basically, that would not be possible. And due to a number of measures that we are considering, and given all the calculations in our report, for example, redistribution of some of the VAT revenue based on the Russian regions, or we even looked into the situation, even though we have some issues with introducing the VAT increase and sales tax, we could see some leveling up of the revenues between the regions as to make it more uniform. But this alignment is not more efficient than if you would do it through the existing system of subsidies to the Russian regions. And therefore, our point of view is that the existing system of inter-budgetary relations is quite capable of solving these problems. And as one of the main outcomes of our presentation, even though we state about institutional value of the taxation system as the way of doing business in Russia, especially because there are many, like many institutional factors, there is a high level of indecision, uncertainty, and the business climate in Russia is estimated by many as not the highest compared to others. A number of proposals which we motion, they are, of course, doing the tax maneuver. We believe that it will be good in the oil and gas industry, and reconsidering number of benefits and breaks for personal income taxes, and I think that we could consider some measures which will re-identify a number of taxations, either by redistribution of some of the personal income tax by the regions. Then I thought that the effect will not be higher than the existing systems of the intra-budget relations. And lastly, I believe that, again, in the oil and gas sector for the new fields, we believe that we have to use the additional income, the system of additional income and respectively additional taxation. Mikhail, thank you very much. We can see that the main point which has been formulated, that the tax system is very close to perfect. It is not a compromise to what the economics theory says, and those institutions and those customs of the business relations which we have in existence. And with budget parameters, our tax system is functioning quite well. I would say that this is the main point. I am asking our panelists to speak up, to comment this topic, and let's begin with you. Thanks a lot. I believe that it is not up to me to begin this discussion, because on one hand, yes, this is so. It would be strange if we start arguing as a Ministry of Finance with the statements of this presentation. But on the other, we should not be self-complacent, and we should not just conserve the situation for many years to come. As we've been discussing, in a modern world, to stay in one place, you still have to run just to be where you are. And it would be interesting to listen to our discussion participants, what is their perspective on what has been presented, or what has been said right now. Maybe some of them read this presentation and report, and we could discuss on these topics and discuss these issues. Do any of the panelists believe that there are certain shortcomings which have to be amended? Okay, then let's keep going. Victor, do you want to say something in the end, or maybe you're ready right now? What do you think has to be reformed, or maybe nothing has to be reformed at all? You know that if I share our side, which is a tax administration perspective, the statement that the system is near perfect, I would not be as bold as to say, because there is no limit to perfection. But the fact that the present system, as it has been formed, the tax system, is functioning as intended, it's obvious. Our tax code is over 25 years old. The system has been formed for quite a long time, maybe not as long as it was in other countries with well-established tax system, but maybe that's to our advantage also. When you build certain rules, we take in the best, and we would skip those long developmental phases of administration rules which were pertinent to other developed economies. So now we can afford what many other countries can't. For example, in the presentation, there was a separate part related to the value-added tax, VAT tax. Very few, if any, I cannot even name you any country of the world, since we basically harmonized the taxation and the VAT tax rules. Very few can afford to build this kind of system which we were able to build. I mean, the system of supervision over VAT tax. Reasons being simple, that this evolutionary development of approaches to taxation, it had its own disadvantages when the rules were either overly liberal. Sometimes it's a disadvantage in terms of taxation, and the possibility to use this data, which we can see, which we can manage using the newest system of VAT tax administration. Overall, I can say that today the tax system, as it seems to me, is fitting and suitable to each category of taxpayers. And we do have our own proposals and ideas and rules for the big, medium, and small companies and companies exporting goods, and companies who just begin their activities. And this year we've introduced the new rules for the self-employed, in 2019. All of this is a base for our taxation system, and it also what we call built-in favorable preconditions. That is, it's a built-in a system where you identify the rules first, and when these rules can be observable, they can be forecastable. That means that you can build your business plan, you can plan your activities years ahead, or maybe even dozens of years into the future. And by the way, the same approach has been used in the last amendments for the category of self-employed citizen, when the legislator is guaranteeing a person that there'll be no changes in conditions for 10 years, which is very important for people to believe that these rules, which people will take advantage of, they will not be changed for a decade, which means that people can make their decision easier and faster. And all of this works as a baseline and gives us the reason to believe that, of course, the tax system is very stable. It has been formed, complete, but at the same time, it does require gradual changes. It has to be evolved in the future, and it has to be fine-tuned in order to be compliant with our population requests and to be able to work with the modern technologies. Thank you. Alexander Shokin, the floor is yours. You can start your own estimation. And of course, the tax system is very stable. It corresponds to the main requirements of our business community. Albeit lately, I would say for the last couple of years, we're speaking about fine-tuning this taxation system. We assume that we should not do any radical changes. We should not fix what has been done by the federal taxation systems and this automated system for the VAT payments and the cash registers when it's all clear and transparent. And even this transparency is one of the advantages, and for those companies who are working semi-legally. It's true, but we've relaxed a little bit. I mean, our business, when our main partners have been speaking about the fine-tuning, polishing up the taxation system instead of rebuilding it. And when we had conversations about this tax maneuver, we thought that the fiscal load will not be changed. If the VAT tax will be hiked, then the insurance contributions will be decreased. So we will redistribute workload, tax load, but it will not be increased. And actually, we got what we got. The insurance payments were on the same way, but actually it was eased because this 30% social contributions is a preferential state, and a nominal would be 34%. So we got 30% instead of 34%. 30 is that actually is which was given to a business, although they have been receiving it even many years before. And in this regard, we, frankly speaking, cannot guarantee that this statement about the stability of the fiscal load and the tax load, this is the statement which will be truly implemented and become a reality in the next economic and political cycle until 2024. Although the moratorium for increasing fiscal load was until the year 2020, and we increased that, now it looks like we are going to, or we were promised to, fix it and not to raise it. But again, we can see different attempts from different sides about reintroduction of new taxes. The reasons being clear. But the possibility of the carbon tax is there. And the Ministry of Economic Development introduced that. The tax rates are still to be discussed, still to be identified by the Russian government. But we believe that if the carbon tax will be introduced, it has to be introduced as a part of all other environmental contributions and taxes which Ministry of Finance is thinking about transferring all these payments. Payments on the negative impact on the environment, the environmental tax, disposal tax, they are moving this into our tax code. If this carbon tax will be introduced, it will be in addition to the existing tax burden. And these kind of cases could be many in the future, all the more that we have not fully agreed about the mechanism of how can we limit this fiscal load, which includes not only tax load, but also the mandatory payments, public payments, which taxpayers have to pay, which are referred to in Russia as non-tax payments. These non-tax payments, for about 2 years, we've been working with the government, and we have developed a draft legislation, which were transferring this mechanism of introducing new payments and the procedures of their introduction, including the federal executive authorities and the regional executive authority, into very strict legislative procedures. And we thought that these 70-plus payments, which businesses calculated, that not all of them have the, not all of them are reasonable. Some of them more of a tax nature, 6 payments in total, and we begin to transfer them into the tax code of Russia, plus a couple of dozens of payments which could be considered as state fees, and only some remainder actually requires some legislative identification in terms of establishing clear procedures of their introduction. Nevertheless, for all the lines we are working. For one reason, that when the Ministry of Finance has transferred all the normative base of these ecological payments into the draft bill about the ecological tax in Russia, the Russian business community realized it's not what they were fighting for. And first of all, still, many issues related to tax collections, we don't fully understand what is the quality of our environment, for example. And we do not have the control measures, distance control units and meters. There are many issues where we have not made up our mind. But speaking of main ecological objections, it's related that if this kind of ecological payment could be nullified, if you behave right, if the economic operators do not actually pollute the environment, if they do not discharge anything or discharge the pollutants at the minimum level, then this tax is what Ministry of Finance and the Federal Tax Service should be fighting for. And in this regard, the environment should not always be good. It means if everybody is not polluting, we don't have any tax payments, ecological tax payments. And there was such a rule. We had such discrepancies that this kind of ecological payment could be compensatory. That means you can improve your environment and pay less. At first, we did not have it fully, and in the proposed draft bill, when our bureau in December decided to assemble and to discuss this draft legislation, quite unexpectedly, Ilya identified that these main pollutants, I mean the big companies, industrial companies, they decided it's too early to introduce this ecological tax. Let's instead work on the ecological collections and fees. And for example, this Platon toll, truck toll system in Russia, because Platon tolling system for Russian trucks is basically in this regime, when it's functioning, it's basically when you are paying off not to be inspected. And in other words, we're back in business, we're going back. Maybe we have to make it tough in terms of the procedures of certain non-tax payments without thinking about their political content, where it's the fee, where it's another revenues, which has a connection to the, like a civil nature, not of the tax nature. Maybe instead we have to use the simple transitional model to build a registry, which could be established by the governmental regulations. Maybe we could toughen the procedure and then could think about anything else. If nothing else, it will enable us to have a public and clear and forecastable procedure about different kind of fiscal payments which business is perceiving as sensitively as any other tax law. The second topic, which for quite a long time we have been discussing, is adoption of tax legislation laws at least 6 months before every financial year. Now the financial year is the first. Any law has to be passed on December 1st, and only 1 month is given for adaptation of a business community before any novelties will be introduced. We do have an understanding. By the way, this version of law about the non-tax payments, there is this version that they have to be adopted before 6 months before all the normative acts and bylaws have to be introduced. So I believe that we could try to do it in this cycle, to put it down on paper so that all the new laws would be adopted during the spring session. Even if spring session will expire in the beginning of July, still it's enough time for the business to get ready for introduction of certain changes.
What else is of our concern out of systemic issues? Not specific, but systemic ones. In the paper, it was mentioned that if something doesn't work well, it is proposed to make specific change to a taxation system, different mechanisms which could compensate shortcomings of systemic solutions in the taxation system. Sometimes systemic gaps are related especially to the need for some private solutions. For instance, let's take the mechanism of investment stimulation. You know that business and government tries to set up a list which projects which would be interesting for business and for government. There are task forces headed by Mr. Siluanov, and we're leading this work together. But so far, there's no understanding with the business with regard to the predictability of fiscal regulatory conditions. We carried out analysis of business proposals, and on the foreground, there are issues of stability, of fiscal burden and regulation. Not financial support is in focus in the form of rates and subsidies, but the Ministry of Finance is exercising to develop it's been doing it for already 6 months, and even today, there was one of the last meetings with Mr. Ivanov concerning the version of law on supporting of investment. It was version 1, version 2, and then draft version on the development of investment activity. That's the name of the draft. But the first clause is the stabilization. So for the period of implementation of invest project, not only for the period of investment, but also the back pay period, and on our estimates, at least 15 years for the majority of projects, we need to provide stability of fiscal burden and other regulatory conditions. Not financial, not fiscal support, but especially this. What does it mean? It means that there is no trust that the stability of the taxation system will be guaranteed for the whole lifetime of these long-term investments. So far, there's no trust, no assurance. We should resort to such special mechanisms and remedies of protection and stimulation of investments. And I believe the more tools would be applicable for the big number of amounts, not for the exclusive amounts, when should be a principle of subjective selection of projects. But when specifically every investor, by putting some amount of money on the table, is entitled to have an agreement with the government about the stability of this burden. But what if they are violated? Whom to sue? Government, ministry, or someone else? We couldn't come to an agreement what to guarantee and for what period of time. But after we come to this agreement, it will turn out that we don't know how to implement it, what legal mechanism to use. But nevertheless, it would be better if we had provided it by the taxation system, and both stimulation of investments and be quite stable, and if the stability should not be expressed in the situation when nothing's changed, but the stability should mean that the basic taxes are not changed, and if there is a redistribution of load, it goes in a way that main principles are not violated, based on which the taxation system is functioning. One of the main one is stimulation of the economic growth and, of course, social social rights. I could speak along, but I'm afraid that Boris Yurievich would criticize me, because he will receive the next floor. Thank you very much, Alexander Nikolaevich. Thank you for the opportunity to speak after you. I can't say that I agree with the general message or specific messages of the whole paper. How can we call stable a system, a tax system, which have only one very stable function, filling up budget with super profits without stimulation of economic growth, and takes liquidity of company for whom it's absolutely not interesting to work, without speaking about population. I have a few slides. I wanted to show a few slides to you. Fiscal load or taxation system should have a few functions. It's all basics. That function of stimulation of economic growth is still there, and the equalization of social inequality. This function is unfortunately not fulfilled. We have only one efficient function, is fiscal function of filling federal budget, predominantly federal budget. I just wanted to pay attention that the main taxes which we now have in the budget is MIT and the payroll taxes. And payroll taxes, if we focus on them initially, this is our place in the world. This is one of the myths we have, that we have low taxes on labor. 13% is only one part. We have one of the highest pension taxes. These are still taxes for every person. When the accumulation system is arrested, people do not believe in their pensions. People take social payments as another tax. So take a look at our level, and the growing level in all countries is dropping of social taxes, and in our country it is growing. We are ranking 182 out of 190 in the load on the salary fund. As for the corporate taxes, our place is 136 in the world out of 190. Of course, you will not mention MET, and there is the natural royalty there. That's why our fiscal load is so high. But let's take a look at the royalty here. Another negative feature of our taxation system is that it does not take into account many things. It covers the whole front, the total front at all. It does not designed for taking out super profits and leave it in the other places. And the main thing, it doesn't stimulate growth in the areas, in the industries which should be most promising in terms of the development of the whole economy. Look, the local, the tax load is higher in the agriculture, in natural resources, in utilities. But in agriculture, the profit is very low. That's why it's so high. And in processing industries. But in non-trading industries, real estate, financial activity, here we have the lowest fiscal load versus profit. So we have very non-selective, very generalized system of tax load. Now I'd like to speak about MET. If we deduct MET from the total taxation load on the raw materials sector, it turns out that the raw materials sector belongs to the industries with a low ratio. It belongs to the group of financial sector and real estate. So MET is our natural royalty. It all belongs to the people, and so they have to give one part of the value they get. It's normal and natural process. But if we deduct it as absolutely mandatory part, it turns out they are not enough taxed. Now about big, small, and medium enterprises. The huge amount of load is on big enterprises. This affects small business. And when we speak about taxation of small business or micro business, and we try to introduce 4%, 6% today, although we are for this, we are supporting this, but nevertheless we speak about the peanuts versus other things. We've always said that you should even neglect it. They do not bear any fiscal loads, any fiscal significance for the budget. So we'd better do not think about it at all. But nevertheless, given that the big guys today, we have, by the way, more than 18,000 medium enterprises, medium class. So if we take a look at the loads in terms of profits, it turns out that the big enterprises, larger companies, bear less load versus profit. The main load lays on 18,000, 19,000 enterprises, I mean versus the profit they have. So they have less profitable story. They have lower efficiency, taxation efficiency versus other enterprises. And here, I can't not say about it. It was said that nothing should be changed in terms of the distribution of incomes by the amount of budgets, but just compare it to other companies. There couldn't be any capitalism without financial independence. The company cannot be developing when all the incomes go to the center and then come back through different forms of financial instruments or tools. They come back in on the lower level. Versus other countries, it's not possible to develop economy without municipal or regional independence. So we can see, in terms of municipalities, in percentage, you can see it. They are not only low, but they are dropping compared to other countries. And incomes, you see the income of municipal incomes. Normally, it is due to transfers from the top. They receive less and less the taxable basis. Although we have had a different situation previously. So I'm not going to enlist all these bullet points. These are our main claims to the existing taxation system, and we believe it led to the situation when we need to radically change the taxation system today. I have to pay a tribute to Sergei Dmitrievich, who will have the floor after me. You will refute my words, maybe, I don't know. But once again, I'd like to say that the taxation reform which we've had in 2002 brought very positive results for the whole economy of Russia, because we had to leave the 90s, the bad 90s. We simplified the taxation system significantly. We cut the amount of taxes, and the most important task was to bring back money from offshores, to bring them back to the Russian system. And this scale of 13%, this flat scale, in this regard, played its good role. And but the number of taxes even grew, and also the number of duties increased. And the fact that duties do not work, they have been working for so many years, and they led us to the situation where we stimulated a little bit processing, and there was a difference between domestic market and export, and it was better to leave something in the domestic market. Now we deleted it, we eliminated it, and we see how we scratch the left ear with the right hand. And first we level it out, and then using some artificial instruments, we bring back money to the processing industry. It's absolutely inefficient and not working scheme. Duties could work, and thank you, Sergei Dmitrievich, that you introduced them. I will comment on this. This is Kudrin and you, that's your job in the beginning of thousands. I just wanted to demonstrate on the example of Eastern countries. Approximately the same trends exist in the West. This is the program of China. This is the top 1, top 2 economy of the world. They to support the growth, they decrease their taxation. Given their growth around 7%, which shouldn't be compared to our growth, of course. And we also calculate and think how to change the system. And today, the system which we are targeted at should be changed, because we have quite a primitive instrument of taking incomes in favor of the budget. It should be based on the big data. We should have clear understanding of what happens in the economics, and we have to pay tribute to the taxation service, which the only one service who has real data and not Rosstat. And the new technologies allow to make our taxation system a smart system. We call it a smart tax system when we should need to have a diversification of taxes, where we should take where it's too much and to reduce the taxation burden where we want to have a growth, or if we need some developments in the economy or in a social area, depending on the tasks set by the government and the country in general. First of all, we should look for new taxes, not in the increasing the VAT plus 2% unique situation and the justification that the incomes are not enough, and the surplus on the background of the surplus of the budget, more than 3 trillions, also increase of taxes given the stagnation of the economics. It's a unique solution in terms of its logic. I don't know how they're being made, this edition, but this is unique for any country, for any macroeconomists. It could be a good ground to laugh very long. Well, we of course need to have optimum ratio between deductions and for investments, and a very fair balance between all the incomes of business, state, and the populations. I'm not going to stay a lot on what we're proposing. Just in brief, first, to stimulate current situation, stimulate the growth for those who grow. The companies which are growing and improve the efficiency of labor should have a subsidized position in terms of tax payments. The new value they are adding should be liable to lower taxes. On the second stage, more serious restructuring, using different taxation mechanisms. We need new mechanisms for the new situation, and new technologies should be based on new tools, new taxation tools. That's why we are here. And here we believe that especially an added tax will give an opportunity of big diversification by industry segments and by regions. So it could be a new smart tax which would differentiate taxation depending from the situation in different segments and different regions. This should be the first stage. I'm sorry for this confusion, but for every sector there have to be a different taxation situation which would allow to develop. But those 9 sectors which could give plus 5% of GDP on our calculations and create around 10 million working places. The second step is more complicated, but once again, I'm not going to delve into it too deep. The taxation burden should be relocated from corporate to individual taxes, and the work on taxation administration as it's done in all over the world for high incomes of individuals. We do not believe that a flat scale, when it was implemented, our president told us 10 years, for 10 years flat tax. Today, I didn't tell about it yet. Today in social taxes, we have social deductions from people with lower and medium incomes because higher income people pay less.
It also applies to the regressive scale for the insurance payments and also for the dividends. You don't pay any insurance payments from the dividends, so the revenues of our big private individuals, high net worth individuals, which get some of their revenues or the most part of their revenues in the form of dividends, they do not pay any insurance payments, which are mandatory payments in Russia, and the social payments. So social inequality simply does not work here. And the instruments that we are looking at are such. Then we're thinking about how to formulate the second stage of the tax reform. Thank you. Thank you. At first, I would like to argue with Boris Titov, if he doesn't mind. Yeah, you're surrounded. You're surrounded. Boris, may I ask you a question to you? Do you understand that it would be good to make such a taxation system for each sector of the economy, like individual taxation system for different sectors of the economy? Yes, you're a little bit doing it over the top because right now we have IT technologies, and today, and there'll be tomorrow of IT technologies. Today, IT technologies, you see what the Federal Tax Service is doing to us, and this VAT, which everybody likes, it was collected only through to the amazing efforts of the Federal Tax Service. They were able to make people pay this VAT because via offshores, via fly-by-night companies, sometimes they would lose 30% of the VAT tax. It's not the most efficient tax, but when it comes to administration of this tax, yes, it's thanks to IT technologies. So introduction of these IT technologies enables us today to build a smart taxation system and largely to fine-tune it for different sectors of our economy, for different industries and regions in a more precise way. And this is why we have different mechanisms, NSP. And my second question is, okay, somebody is choosing priority lines, priority industries, and then you give additional benefits. Right now, now it's a market economy, and we have liberals who are here also, financial liberals. They have taught us one thing, that the priority should be one. And this, the name of this is the collective federal budget. First, you have to centralize all the finances and then distribute all the finances into the regions. This is what we have today, and this is our priority. So setting up right tax rate by the smart people in the regions who have to identify their own strategies, and the government officials and the public officers who know that some people are in priority and some are not. And for example, speaking about the United Kingdom, this is what they do. And today the USA is a non-market economy, but this is what they do also. Thank you, but we do understand that setting goals is a very important element. It's a question about choosing your priority, and goal setting is not always successful. In your example with the export fees, yeah, I would like to comment the export fees. Yes, in the beginning of the year 2000, for export fees for the oil and petroleum products, some decisions have been made which had been in existence in place for quite a long time. Oil was taxed very heavily, petroleum products were taxed very lightly. There was an illusion that the oil professionals, having received this additional premium to the decreased export fees, will immediately start to upgrade and modernize their equipment as to product more petrochemical projects, and things will get better for them. But we had quite the opposite effect, because we got a lot of very primitive refineries, private refineries, who were making hard oil out of oil, because the hard oil was taxed with the least tax rate, and there was basically the printing machine that they got heating oil, mazout or heating oil, and it was the oil. No, it's a question of rates. It's a question of rates. It's a question of decision making. I will give you another example. This example from other country of Uzbekistan, where I'm traveling to very often. They have adopted a very popular decision that you have to provide the biggest benefits and tax breaks to a small business. And now 54% of the GDP is provided by small business in Uzbekistan. Let's take a look at what this small business is all about. So we're speaking about the retail, we're speaking about the public catering companies, and all the companies where the no more than 20 people, 20, 25 people. And today this resulted in, among this small business, there are a lot of companies with a turnover over $1 billion. It's about administration. No, this is not about administration. It's a desire to do it. It's a desire to make it better for people. Please understand that today the social taxes resulted in the fact that how can you call a financial system stable when the shadow sector or non-legal sector is up to 40%? Boris, I simply want to say that sometimes by this kind of, there is a saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And okay, let's say that we implement new system, effective evaluation. It does not mean that if somebody violates the traffic rules, we have to ban the driving. The rules. It's all within the law. No violations, but simply the consequences may be very fatal. But okay, let's go back to our main topic. I've read just before the session. Whether the tax system is perfect or not, it serves the purpose. It serves the purpose to be stable, to be sustainable. We have it, and as for the stability and predictability, we want to have it more. It's an important task without which the business will not be developing and growing. Yeah, absolutely. These are important things. Is the system perfect? Of course, it is not perfect, because it cannot be perfect if it's a result of the compromise. saying we're not going to use these buttons, but we'll extend the sleeves. And this is, we get such a suit which we are having today. Do we have any problems in our taxation systems? Absolutely. Do we need to fine-tune it? Absolutely. We have some mistakes which have been made recently. For example, the cancellation of the pool of taxpayers, and I believe cancellation of consolidated pool of taxpayers, the so-called oil tax maneuver. It's a right decision, but very, very late decision. I would agree with Sergey that we could do it in a shorter period of time, having thought about the compensatory mechanisms. We have a lot of problems related to benefits with tax breaks. Boris, I understand that you are a proponent of different benefits, tax breaks, but there's no free tax breaks. So in any situation, I was proponent of expanding tax base with minimum tax rates. And the tax benefits, they're also distort free competition. Distort free competition because recipients of these tax breaks, of course, are in different advantages situation. And these tax benefits do not always work wherever they are supplied in the state and the way they are provided, because within the global economy, these tax breaks could be easily removed. As obtained in one country, they could be removed to a different jurisdiction, different state of preference in terms of totally different conditions for a business. And very often our tax breaks and benefits are also done or given because people say, yes, we have certain institutes underdeveloped in our country. Yes, we admit that the system of the private property protection, our law enforcement, our judicial system is not quite good, so let's give tax breaks to some economic agents, and this supposedly will help business, so the business will finally start investing into Russia, not into any other country with this kind of taxation regime. And this will be, they say, our competitive advantage. I believe that it's an illusion for the most part, and we should not be looking at that when we are building our tax system. Out of the questions which are not resolved yet, but we have to look into them, I have to pay attention to them, I would single out the question related to services export. Especially today, when the world is becoming more and more global, when services are more and more digital, they're more of information nature, and when this kind of economy, which is about the simple functions like exporting your merchandise, in the modern global world, it's all is working very differently. So we have to make an effort so that the systems which are operational in different countries would exclude double taxation or exclude double non-taxations of goods and services. And in this regard, we have to take a closer look at the rules which identify the place where a service has been provided for the purposes of the taxing value added tax. And maybe when we speak about the export of our services, should the place of providing this service is in different states, this could be a zero tax rate. In certain circumstances, this would give us a competitive edge for those who are providers of this kind of services and exporters of this kind of services. And finally, I believe that now quite a big attention has to be paid to two issues. First, it's company in a global world, and by using different taxation modes, regimes, national taxation modes. They can do the arbitrage and they relocate the profit center from one jurisdiction into the other jurisdiction. And the transnational companies, in this regard, they are in many cases paying minimal taxes, while national companies who do not have this kind of capabilities are paying way more, which violates competition. We still have to work with this in this regard. And the second point, the world is changing very rapidly towards digitalization. 3D printing, artificial intelligence, robotization, robotics, and things like that, and you name it. And a taxation system of basically of no government is ready for that yet. I mean, to be able to quickly respond to these challenges, and the world is going to change faster and faster in the future. And with this, I would like to wrap up. These are the things we have to start thinking about today. Thank you. Thank you very much, dear colleagues. We have about 10-15 minutes, and we have to finish up our discussion, so I would like to, or we can stay longer if you want. I still wanted to discuss several issues, and I will be very brief. And then Igor, maybe. He didn't say much in the beginning. Maybe he could now be more eloquent. But before asking the question, I will just give you one example. At the Gaidar forum, speaking about Yegor Gaidar back in 1988, he had written an article with a number. The number has changed, but the meaning did not. I will give you one example. Back in 1988, they were saying if we take all the oil which our refineries are taking and sell it abroad, we can buy all the petroleum projects, and we'll even have some surplus of money. I don't remember exactly, but with a modern oil price, $50 to $60 per barrel, we will have about $13 billion after this kind of operation if we sell all the oil and buy all the petroleum projects. And this is how we may have all this. You're thinking about not the fees, but the rates. No, I said what I said. If we sell the total of oil which we supply to the refineries and then buy the products, their whole portfolio will have a surplus of $13 billion extra dollars. This is just one picture for you. And now question. A question for you, a very short one. It's about administration. The digitalization and the tax administration. We understand that in the last couple of years, we have an increment of the revenue of all the budgets was possible due to what you have done. It's true. I doubt that anybody will challenge it. And I think it's 1% or 1.5% of the GDP. Are these reserves exhausted, or the taxes are being collected due to digitalization, big data collection? You may be ever more efficient in collecting taxes. Absolutely, the resource is limited, but by improving and by developing administration system, what we have been doing for the last several years, we can see a very good result. It does work. It has been identified by the participants of today's discussion. And these systems, which have already been established, online systems and VAT collection systems and the taxation systems of the foreign internet companies and the product marking system and the system which has been introduced since 2018 with the possibility of paying taxes for the self-employed people. By the way, it's absolutely reasonable and a minimal tax which will cause many people to get out of shadow and become legal in their economic operations. About 15 million people, we estimate, will become legal, will become into the limelight. It all becomes possible thanks to using up-to-date systems and by finding your own place in this electronic economy in terms of the tax administration. Our main goal being to build in the tax administration into the environment of a taxpayer as a be it individual or be it a legal entity, because what's the most difficult is to motivate people, motivate just an ordinary person to pay their taxes. Nobody's thinking. Like there are big arguments and big debates. Why should these physical persons pay 4% now if they're paying nothing? We are speaking about the people who are making their own living, and but people forget that by paying nothing, citizens violate our legislation. Today, everybody has to pay legally. They have to pay personal income tax, which is 13% in Russia. And today, one of our agenda items, like, shall we stay with the progressive scale? But still, there is a liability, personal liability to pay taxes. And the legislator solved this problem by creating conditions so that a citizen could fulfill their constitutional obligations. Taxes have to be paid by everyone, but these taxes have to be reasonable. And this is why when the tax system has the rules which people and companies are willing and open to comply with, then it becomes much more efficient. Not even when the tax authorities have all the instruments for collection of taxes. Let's remember, for example, the last amendments, which has been in effect for about a year, changes related to introducing the VAT tax for electronic services provided by the foreign internet companies.
And roughly speaking, there are not so many instruments to influence biggest app suppliers, app vendors. But it did work because rules are set which companies are ready to abide by. And this balance of populating the budget and the willingness to fill the budget and the reasonability of the conditions which are imposed, and this balance is equal and it's reached now. And when we are able to use new technologies, build up big data, and have an opportunity to manage this data, we see what we see now. It's absolutely incomparable with what we saw 5 years ago. And we are learning how to manage this data. We introduce systems which allow to reduce administrative burden and to populate our consolidated budget. A small remark. Physical follow-up and marking is not big data. This is the 19th century, and big data is 21st century. Excise of hazardous goods is okay, but please still pay it into account, take it into account. It's not the big data. I have the final question to Alexander Nikolaevich and to Boris Yurievich, and then Ilya Vyacheslaevich, please. We just touched upon the issue of self-employed. How do you evaluate this innovation? Let's take a look how many people will go away from the registered sector to self-employed to pay 4% or 6%, and then we can evaluate this efficiency. If too many people go, then it's efficient. This idea, we've been developing this idea for 3 years. When the state almost accepted it and then went away to the governance, to teachers, and 950 people were registered only. Now there are 8,000. That's a big progress. 120 million. It's very close. Nevertheless, the question is, this is a smart tax. It's a really smart tax. It's an opportunity to introduce new technologies, to implement them. It's a chance for people to pay instead 13, 4, or 6%, which should be very interesting for them. But not all people on self-employed are so smart. And those who would use it, let's live and see. 8,000 is a good thing, but 20 million is not far away. Well, our proposal was even more simple. even simpler. We are standing on not advanced point of view from the IT point of view. Those people who let for rent beds in Crimea, they do not pay no taxes. They just pay to policemen who take part of their income. It's very hard for them to download app in the smartphone, and then every deal should be put through this and then control not more than 250,000 a month. Well, it's for smart and for advanced people. When aggregators, Yandex Taxi or other aggregators in Moscow, Udo or other aggregators, for such people, it might work. It's really profitable for them. But for all grandmas letting for lease some beds, it's not so good. We proposed a lump sum which would be paid as a certificate for activity, monthly base, annual base, or for 3 years, and limited types of activities, 46 types of activities at that point we proposed. We proposed to introduce it in other regions. So far, the experience is realized in advanced regions, in more advanced. But our proposal is to introduce it in not so advanced regions, based on our proposal, based on our framework, to understand how many people would register, would buy the certificate there, and compare with those who download the application. I also believe that the system, like patent-based system, is more efficient other than the system which is being implemented now. I agree with Mr. Titov that in 4 regions the experiment goes along the legal basis, but there could be a few more regions with a different experiment. All our experiment is a way to implement the same system with this resort fee, and now in Duma they think to transform it to tourist tax, and the Ministry of Finance considers this tourist tax as a next step of transformation of the pilot resort fee. Well, I'd like to speak about another problem. Given the transparency of the federal taxation system due to the technologies, big data, and so on, many companies, small companies, and even medium companies being in the gray area, in the gray zone, they have a stimulus to go out of this shadow. But what happens when they start to go out of it and they're ready to pay taxes in the full amount? They are scared that the regulators will come for them and ask for previous years. In 2019, they pay everything they should to, understanding that they anyway will be found. But 3 years depth of review is there, and even if the taxation service, seeing them in the green zone, will not review them, do you know how many other law enforcement controlling agencies and other agencies who have 10 years depth of checking? And so going out of the shadow is a very dangerous thing. As soon as you get out of the shadow, saying that previously you violated the law, you are doing the self-reporting, and this is one of the most important breaks why people are not hurrying and running to register as self-employed, and sometimes businesses are being closed. They understand they won't be able to survive by 2 reasons. First reason is the sins of the past, and the second reason is the look at those who work in the white area, facing a very big burden from the administrative and regulators, and they are just not willing to get in the same situation. So this real dilemma is there, and we should think together how to solve it, how to overcome it. The amnesty was proposed to the president on the old previous violations, not to in still cases. We've discussed it, this topic. Legally, it's not possible to announce amnesty for non-discovered violations and crimes. First, you should find the crime, should go to court, and then to convict the person, and then to make an amnesty. Thank you very much. The discussion was really interesting, and the quality of this discussion demonstrates quality characteristics of our system. Now we are discussing absolutely different problems, absolutely other issues compared to 10 or 15 years ago. This fact itself tells us about the qualitative changes and not about the closeness of systems again, but whether we can find an ideal system on practice and how strong it can come to it. But so far, we can say that, well, we can't say that the taxation system is so bad that it should be completely rebuilt. As for the fact and the question what we should do in the nearest years, we really came to an agreement, and we discussed it, that after serious changes of 2018, we have to hold on a little bit in terms of systemic changes and to work in the conditions we created. And we should fix changes we accepted, and in the nearest cycle we shouldn't touch it. Of course, it doesn't exclude further improvement, further fine-tuning, and it was also mentioned by Alexander Nikolaevich and Mr. Titov and Sergei Dmitrovich. Well, we should discuss, and we can discuss it. But first, non-tax payments, what to do about them? Shall we include them in the tax code or not? This is a disputable question. We took a decision together that these payments can be included in the tax code, but they shouldn't be. Well, but you keep saying that these are these are taxes, but these are fees. These different things. I understand the argumentation that, well, really, in case for pollution payments, the ideology that you pay them if you pollute. If you do not pollute, you don't pay. And in the case of the fiscal payment, you pay it anyway, and everything else are subsidies, and they should be grounded. But this is a question of discussion again. It's not like there's some pressure from the part of the government that these payments should be brought in the tax code. There was a request for solving of this issue. We've been discussing it, and so far we do not have a final solution. Neither government nor business have a final way out. We understand that it needs to be regulated, and I think we will find optimal regulation. The question of the predictability. Now there is a norm that all serious changes of the legislation should be taken in the spring session. And first, it would be good to execute it, to fulfill it in the form it exists, because with regard to the recent years, I don't remember when it was not stopped. I think it was in 2007. So this is not the issue of changing the legislation, but the practice of taking decision in the state. So if first we need to take a law to abide by the norms of the budget code, right? Yesterday we had a very interesting session, by the way, in the same room about the competitiveness of Russian jurisdiction, and it was seriously discussed that the law about laws should be passed, because there are such high claims. That I worked in the first set of the State Duma, and we had a draft law on the order of accepting federal laws and federal constitutional law. And it's been 25 years. This law is put in some far shelf, and we cannot pass it. In the basis, there should be a traditional practice of making state decisions. Maybe the law and laws will not be needed, and maybe we will finally find a solution of an issue you have been discussing, the guarantee of fiscal stability. It's very interesting that you in our discussions, you came to an issue that even if we guarantee stability, how to provide execution of the guarantees. And the question why is that the next step of your discussion, of our discussion with you, will be the conclusion that the main way to provide the result is the product sharing agreement. Not an independent court, but what happens when investor, a big transnational corporation or a big Russian company comes to any country, African country with not developed legal entity. We understand that the income tax will be 25%. We don't know how it will be in 1 year from now. Let's put it in the investment agreement, and if we have a guarantee that you do not abolish it, all disputes should be relocated to some court of Stockholm. But we should hardly come to such agreements to be signed between the Russian business and the Russian government. We should not take money, but oil, the production sharing agreement. But that's not the fact. The disputes, and we were part of such disputes because we also closed such agreement, that investor does not trust the state he is working in, and saying we do not trust your legislation system. So we want to include tax rate in the agreement, and secondly, we will sue you in a different country because we do not trust your court system. Of course, we can have same principles with Russian business, but it would hardly be an optimum solution, an optimum way to involve, to attract investment to the Russian economics. So. In all subsidized agreements signed by ministries, there is a clause that the government can terminate unilaterally any agreement given that they believe that the other party, the company, violated some conditions, certain conditions. This is a court procedure, and the government is free to take such decisions. I don't want to continue our discussion about these agreements, but the stability of the taxation system should be guaranteed in an institutional way, and relations between the investor and state should be built on a common trust. Either we relocate disputes to a different jurisdiction, saying that these are there are special administrative zones. There will be the court will be the same. There are no peculiarities with regard. The rule of law can be different. The law can be different. Every resident selects the law which is applicable, but the court system is the same there. But please accept the statement that such discussions and such solutions and decisions taken are much more civilized. And how to build the mutual trust. Long years of joint work, of joint hatred, right? What else I wanted to tell you? What is interesting and important for us in terms of taxation policy? It's what was mentioned by Mr. Titov. And Mr. Shatalov was very critical. But I understand that Mr. Titov was the candidate for the presidency to head of a country less than 1 year ago. I understand that. So, the way of the presenting of the materials should be perceived in with a certain reservations. Well, but the idea itself, smart taxes, smart taxation, is a very important idea, and you didn't contradict to the main speech. You just had a different standpoint. You said yes, that municipals get few, and we should change the situation. And Mr. Dobashevsky said yes, we should change it, but we don't know how. You said that duties is the issue of rates, and Mr. Drobinski said that the best rates are zero rates. There are no new things for me I couldn't see, but what is important? Two important conclusions out of this presentation. That first, we cannot be complacent, and new technologies, new opportunities give us new chances, new opportunities, not only from the point of view of administration, and also from the point of view of the taxation policy, and new challenges also. And that's what we couldn't imagine some time ago. This becomes true. First, for instance, system of VAT control. We talk a lot about it. It is based on a central service where sales data are being compared and purchase data being compared. Some 15 years ago, I read one book about VAT issued by the World Monetary Fund, saying that it would be great to do this, but unfortunately there are no such computation facilities in the world, and the countries which introduced this, in South Korea, couldn't get anything instead of white noise, because the data are huge, and there are no algorithms to distinguish between white noise and the real data. Now we realized it, and it works, maybe not perfectly, but still it gives results, and we receive more and more technologies of that kind. So those tools which seemed to us, well, like the self-employed tax, like unimaginable, now they become quite real and doable. On the other hand, successes in tax administration very often should be coordinated with the progress in other areas. Otherwise, there could be problems. The same as the professional tax, self-employed. They shouldn't be registered as sole proprietor. Nobody would be checked. The tax rate is very low. No cash registers. A very simple regime with reasonable tax rate, with simple payment, and unlike patent, you shouldn't pay it in advance. You can pay afterwards, after you get your profit. But there is a number of other controlling bodies and other rules. If a person is baking cakes, and if he would register as a self-employed, yes, he wouldn't have any problem with it. But there is other regulations. How many eggs should be put in the pastry, and there should be cold storage, whole storage, and special requirements from sanitary department. Well, otherwise it would be punished. Well, since we do not are responsible for this area, there are big risks, and you already put this question, and we should do something about it. And that was mentioned by the Prime Minister. Yes, we can make a very good tax system. We can make very smart tax administration. But what should be the thickness of the pie? That's the problem.
And if you speak about your past sins, they may open the criminal investigation. That's a concern. They simply can open investigation. That's a serious risk. And speaking about our successes in the reform of the tax administrations, they have also to be backed up for us to have a breakthrough. They have to be backed up by the same promotions for the different industries and for the state policies. It's a matter of trust, dear colleagues. Thank you very much for the discussion. It was very interesting. Thank you. Can I say one more thing? Ministry of Finance, do not impose an excise duty, and for the grapes, and how about importation of wine to be sanctioned? Thank you. Have a great evening.